Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel on a very exciting video. You might be looking at the list and saying, hold on, Fazan's already done his US Open power rankings. No, I haven't. Don't worry. This is just a very quick 10-second jot down 10 players. And we have not finalized this whatsoever. We're going to go through it. Of course, before we get into it, remember to hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. Thank you so much for tuning in as always. If you're listening on a podcast platform, do leave a rating, review, subscribe, all that good stuff, especially on Apple Podcasts. I can see people have been leaving reviews, so really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and continue to help support us. We do appreciate it. Okay, for those of you who are new to the channel and those who maybe haven't tuned in for these power ranking videos, I'm going to very briefly break down what it's about. So we have it for the ATP and WTA side. ATP one I did about a week ago. WTA one didn't manage to do it, and I started doing it, and then the tournament had begun. And I thought, you know what, let's wait until the end of this week. We have a better idea, and also for the women's side, it's just so open. Before Wimbledon, it was easy. Before Roland Garros, it was easy because Swiatek was dominating. She was looking really strong. Now, after a couple of early losses in the round of 16 and just not looking particularly good, since the start of Wimbledon, start of Wimbledon, she didn't look good, to be honest with you. So since the Roland Garros victory, she hasn't looked as good. So it's opened up massively for the other girls, and that's a good thing in terms of the competitive nature of the tournament going into the US Open, but it also makes doing the rankings so hard. Let's get into it then. And actually, before I do, I didn't mention the criteria. So very briefly, the criteria is form in 2022. Current form gets a little boost, so there's a massive bump for current form on the surface in the last few weeks. So Sakkari obviously won the Silicon Valley Classic tournament, which was a 250 in San Jose, and Simona Halep won last week in Canada in the National Bank Open, or whatever it's called nowadays, and that was a Masters 1000 tournament, so that obviously holds more weight. We've also had some players going deeper in these tournaments, semi-finals, quarterfinals, etc. But we will cater in the Australian Open result, especially as well this year, because it's a Grand Slam on a hard court. Yes, slightly quicker surface, Australia generally, but we can factor that in. And of course, even results throughout the year on the clay and the grass, because a lot of players tend to transition and carry form from previous tournaments and even just throughout the year. Then the third factor is historical form. So form last year at the US Open and prior years as well, and patterns that we've seen. So let's start off with number one. Now, I've got Swiatek there, and I have to be honest with you, it's very tough to pick anyone else, and it's also very tough to pick her because I don't know. If I'm being honest with you, at this current moment, in terms of the most informed player, you'd probably say Simona Halep after just winning. But she hasn't been that good this year. Could she be peaking for the US Open? Maybe. And if she goes on to win Cincinnati next week, she'll be my number one. But for now, I think Swiatek at number one is okay because we shall see how she gets on. I don't know. It's an interesting one because Swiatek, form-wise, has been looking pretty good. Generally, she's been looking pretty good, Swiatek. Up until Wimbledon, she had that fantastic 37-match win streak, then lost, to Cornet in a interesting match and just didn't look comfortable at all on the grass. And the transition from high bounce and slow surface to low bounce and quicker surface just didn't help at all. She'd had no practice before Wimbledon. It wasn't ideal. Now she's come back and she's had very topsy-turvy results. Didn't look particularly good last week. Lost to Haddad Maya in 3 sets, who, to be fair, made the final and lost to Halep in 3 sets. So she had a really good tournament. I'm going to stick her at one still, and I'll tell you a couple of reasons why. And hopefully you're convinced, because I don't know who else goes at number one at the moment. These rankings, especially for the women's side, I feel could change drastically next week after Cincinnati's done and we do our final power rankings for the US Open. But as it stands, I've got Swiatek at one because of her form throughout the whole year. Also, she made the semi-finals of the Australian Open earlier this year. It's on a very quick surface, Australia. And not just the fact that it's a quick surface, but at the US Open, it's a slower surface, right? So it's a slower hard court. That will help her. Out of all of the Grand Slams, the Grand Slam that plays the most like clay that isn't clay, if that makes sense, is the US Open. And that's why we've seen Nadal win 4 US Opens on the men's side. It's a slower surface, it's higher bounce. It's also the type of bounce which you can rely on, which is why a lot of players enjoy playing on hard courts, because you don't get those kind of odd bounces you get on clay and grass. So you would expect her to have some success with her kick serve as well at the US Open. One of the best kick serves on the WTA Tour. Let's see how she is in Cincinnati next week. But for now, I've got her at number 1. And mainly because I don't really know who else to go to. Number 2 is an interesting one because I've got Coco Gauff here. I kind of jotted it down quickly. And I'm thinking about whether I should have her there or should I have Halep there? She just won. Hannah Myers had some good results recently. Even like, Badosa. But Badosa, being very up and down. So who do we pick? I'm going to stick with Coco Gauff because I think she's had pretty consistent results for the last few weeks and months. Made the final of the French Open at Wimbledon as well. I mean, didn't do as well as she would have liked, but in the end, right, lost to Anisimova, who, is a very dangerous player, a fellow American, and she might even feature in these power rankings because for me, she has had some fantastic results as of late anyway, and she's a very, very, very solid player. But Gauff had some fantastic wins recently at the Silicon, Valley Classic, for example. She beat some top players, and I'll quickly just go through them now. So she beat, Naomi Osaka in the round of 16, which is a fantastic win. That's a really, really good win. Then also, beat, ended up losing to Badosa in the quarterfinals. That can happen. Badosa is a good player. She's been very up and down, Badosa as well, by the way. Very bizarre. I know she was injured in the National Bank Open, which is a shame because she made, the semi-finals of the Silicon Valley Classic, lost in straight sets to Kasatkina, and then didn't manage to kind of carry that form through because of injury. So that's a big shame. But Coco Gauff then lost to the eventual champion, Swiatek Halep, in the quarterfinals of the National Bank Open. I mean, is there really any harm in that? Not particularly. I mean, yeah, you think she might play a bit better and potentially win. I'm pretty high on Coco Gauff, as you can probably notice by my rankings, but I don't really see. It's a difficult one. She should be up there, I think, at number 2. That's my read on it. I think, again, I'm not really taking into account Wimbledon too much. I'm still taking into account because it's the most recent Grand Slam, but the surface, as I said, plays more like the French. And I feel like with more time for her to tee it up, she's very good defensively, Coco Gauff. I think she will be having some success. Now, the US Open might suddenly play really quickly and then I have egg on my face. But generally, it doesn't play that quickly. It hasn't played that quickly for the last few years. So I'm going to go Coco Gauff at number 2. And number 3 is an interesting one because I've got Jabeur here, but I'm not quite sure whether her form on the clay and grass is going to translate onto the hard courts this year. She's had some pretty average results as of late. Lost to some, well, just not particularly good players, honestly. I know she retired against Qinwen Zheng in the round of 32 in the National Bank Open. Lost to Kudermetova in the Silicon Valley Classic in straight sets, which isn't a great win. But they did beat Madison Keys, though. It's a good win. And where do we stand with her? I would say that, do I have her at 3? Given that she had a really good clay court season, apart from obviously Roland Garros, which she lost in the first round, made the final of Wimbledon. Does that mean she's going to start to carry some of that form into Grand Slams now and potentially go deep? Potentially. It's hard to know. I'm going to go with Jabeur at 3. I'm going to keep her there. But I'm not sold. And as I said, these rankings can very easily change. For the women's side, I find it so hard right now to do it. Number 4, Halep, and I think she deserves to be in the top 4 for sure. After winning, in Canada, fantastic result, and deservedly so, should be high up the rankings for sure. I don't think did she play the Silicon Valley Classic? I don't think she did. So she didn't play that 250, so that's all we've got to go on is a win, and a win against some very good players as well. She has played some really good tennis recently, and I know there's been a lot of talk about her and Patrick Mouratoglou, but I guess that's a big tick on the side of Patrick Mouratoglou in terms of how relationship's going so far. So beat Halep Maya in 3 sets, beat Pegula in 3 sets. Pegula is one that we'll talk about in a second as well. Also beat Coco Gauff, really good win, which we talked about a minute ago. So Teichmann as well. These are all really good results from Halep. So some fantastic wins from a very, very good player, Simona Halep, and she's finding her form. She's now the top, I think she'll be top 15, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, really good to see. It's an interesting one. It's an interesting one. Right, number 5. Now I've got Pliskova here. Now I'm not sold on that one. So she had the semi-finals of the Rogers Cup, beating some good players. I mean, she lost to Halep Maya in the end. Beat Sakkari, good win. Also beat Katie Bolter early on, which is a good win considering that she lost to her at Wimbledon. Got her revenge though, which is good to see. Beat Krejcikova. I'm not really sure how much I can look into that. Krejcikova hasn't looked particularly good in the last few months. Lost to Anisimova in the round of 16. Silicon Valley Classic. That's what I mean. It's just so up and down. These girls are just so up and down. It's just so like, how do you know how they're going to perform? You just don't. You really don't. I'm going to go with. I'm not going to go with Pliskova because I just think she's way too inconsistent. I'm going to Halep Maya, not just because of the recency bias of her making the final, but she had a really good grass court swing. I don't think, and as I said, I'm not placing a huge amount of importance on necessarily the form on that surface. What I'm taking into account is form generally. I think she's made some big steps by doing really well in that swing. Now she lost in the first round to Liu in the Silicon Valley Classic, but then obviously thought, okay, I'll brush myself off and I'll go again. And she went again really, really well, beating some fantastic players like Leylah Fernandez, the US Open finalist last year. Also beat Iga Swiatek, fantastic win, of course. And, beating Pliskova. So fantastic wins for me. Number 6. Now, I think Pliskova probably has to be in there, but I'm going to put her below Kasatkina. Now, Kasatkina is an interesting one because she's, again, and I feel like I'm saying this about all the players, so up and down. So up and down. All of these players are just, it's just crazy. And she got a really, really tough first round draw, if I'm not mistaken, against a really, really good player in Bianca Andreescu, if I am correct in thinking, which I think I am. And that's not an easy one, right? I mean, it's a really, really tough match. Should she be winning it? I guess she's just won a tournament, so maybe expected to, but in the end, obviously didn't manage to. There's no massive harm in that, I guess. Andreescu's a really, really good player. We might talk about it. I'm not really sure she's going to feature, if I'm being honest with you, in these rankings. But yeah, like Kasatkina at 6 for me. Dangerous player. Has a little bit about her. Number 7, I'm going to go Pegula. Pegula's been really good this year. She's been a lot of quarterfinals, a lot of semifinals, and even some finals as well. She's been really good this year on all surfaces. And just looking at her kind of performances, she made a semifinals of the Rogers Cup, losing to Halep, who was the eventual champion, in 3 sets as well. So she's been playing some really good tennis, as I said. Then, didn't play the Silicon Valley Classic, so we can't really talk about her in that. But I think she's played some fantastic tennis. She's an aggressive baseliner. She has a good all-round game. She'll be playing at home as well, which, again, we don't know how much of an advantage that's really going to be. But for me, she's a very talented player. She's got form, and she's probably one of the only consistent players coming into this US Open and this Grand Slam. Potentially and arguably the most consistent, you could argue. Then if we talk about, I guess, other players, and this is where it gets really tough because it's kind of scratching your head. And you might be thinking, well, hold on, Raducanu, the US Open champion, why is she not in there? And that's because she hasn't had the results to back it up, honestly. I know we can cater in last year, but that's all we have really from Raducanu. Fernandez, I guess a bit different, but she had a really tough match against Hada Maya, who made the final in the end of the Rogers Cup. So that's a tough one, I have to say. Unlucky in the end, you might say. It's so difficult, you know that. It's so difficult to know. Like, who do you go for? Because there's just so many players. Like some players, like Anisimova, got knocked out in the first round of the Rogers Cup, and then she made semis, wasn't it? The semis of the Silicon Valley Classic, which it's a 250, but she's still quarterfinal. Sorry, but still, like she beat some good players there. It's a tough one. Do you go Sabalenka, who obviously made semi-finals of the US Open last year, played some really good tennis, hasn't really found her form this year. I know she's definitely been affected by what's been going on with the ban, etc. But lost to Coco Gauff in the round of 16 in 3 sets. I'm going to go Sabalenka, and that's kind of a mixture of historic form and also some recent form as well. Made the quarterfinals and semi-finals the last 2 tournaments, so there is some form there from her. So I'm going to Sabalenka at number 8. Now we look at someone else, and I'm going to go with Belinda Bencic. Made the quarterfinals of Rogers Cup, lost to Hada Maya. I think it's in 3 sets. Yep, and Silicon Valley Classic. She's a very, very, very good hardcourt player as well. Of course, won the gold in Tokyo last year. Yes, you can get some random winners in Tokyo, of course, but generally she's played some really good tennis. Didn't play in the Mubadala Silicon Valley Classic. So, yeah, that's what I'm going to go for. I'm going to go for Bencic at number 9. And then number 10, I'm going to go for... It's difficult because we're really talking about Pliskova. We're talking about potentially like Leylah Fernandez. That's more historical form, I guess, making the final. We're talking about, I don't think Raducanu makes it. Rogers, Andreescu maybe. Although Andreescu hasn't maybe played the best generally. Lost in the first round of the Mubadala Silicon Valley Classic. Lost early in the Rogers Cup as well. But a good win over Kasatkina, of course. Do you go Camila Giorgi? Had some good wins. Azarenka, who I normally am really high on, hasn't played particularly well. So I'm going to back up the list with Pliskova, I think. So Pliskova at number 10. She is going to be my 10th, and that's because of her recent form. Again, didn't have a very good Wimbledon. Hasn't really played that well this year. Generally, we're in the semi-finals of the National Bank Open this year. Lost in straight sets to Hada Maya, but that's no shame in that. She's in great form. And then, in the Silicon Valley Classic, she, didn't go particularly far, but in the end made the round of 16, lost to Anisimova, who's someone who, again, I guess maybe potentially unlucky to miss out. She's had a really good year. She might be someone who moves next year for sure. So 1 to 10, let's go through it. Swiatek at number 1, Gauff at number 2, Jabeur at number 3, 4 is Simona Halep, 5 Hada Maya, 6 Kasatkina, 7 Pegula, 8 Sabalenka, 9 Bencic, 10 Pliskova. Have I missed anyone? I'm sure I have. Let me know your rankings. What do you disagree with? What do you agree with? Really, really interested to know your thoughts because I have absolutely not zero idea, but I find it really tough to do these rankings for the women's side for sure. Thanks very much, guys. Stay safe and well. Hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and we'll see you on the next video. Also, do leave a rating or review if you're a podcast listener. Thank you so much. And we'll see you for the ATP rankings for the US Open. Power rankings, the second edition.